The October air was cold enough to sting, but I barely felt it as I stood at my father's graveside watching his casket descend into the earth. The low mechanical hum of the lowering device filled the silence between soft sobs and the distant rustle of trees. I thought the worst was over, that burying my father would be the hardest thing I'd ever face. I was wrong. My stepmother Vivian stepped forward, then heels crunching against the gravel. She looked immaculate as always, black designer suit diamond earrings catching the faint sunlight, her face painted with the kind of grief that photographs well but never reaches the eyes. Before we let Sterling rest, she said, her voice sharp and deliberate, "There's something everyone here deserves to know." I didn't look up at first. I thought she might talk about Dad's generosity, his kindness, how he built 3 hardware stores from nothing. Instead, her next sentence sliced through the crisp air like a blade. "Brooke isn't Sterling's real daughter." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The words didn't register like they were spoken underwater. Then came the gasps, soft at first, then growing into a ripple of horrified murmurs that spread through the crowd like a wave. My Aunt Greta's prayer book slipped from her hands and landed in the mud. My cousin Mallory grabbed my arm. What she whispered, but I couldn't answer. My throat felt locked, my tongue heavy, my pulse roaring in my ears. Vivian smiled faintly as if savoring the attention. "Sterling was a man of secrets," she said, gesturing toward the casket. "And the biggest one is standing right there." She pointed at me, her manicured nail trembling with mock sympathy. This woman has been living a lie for 32 years. She's not his biological daughter. My knees almost buckled. The ground felt unsteady, like it might open up and swallow me whole. I heard someone behind me whisper, "Oh my God." Another voice said. At his funeral, the pastor looked frozen, his lips parted but no words coming out. Aunt Greta found her voice first. "Vivian, how dare you?" she shouted. "This is obscene." But Vivian only tilted her head, pretending calm righteousness. "I'm telling the truth," she said. Sterling would have wanted the truth to come out. My gaze fell on my father's casket, the polished wood reflecting the gray sky. I could almost hear his laugh, the sound of it echoing through the store aisles, the scent of sawdust and coffee that clung to his jackets. He'd called me every Sunday night without fail, told me he was proud of me, called me his greatest achievement. And now, this woman, this stranger who married him 8 years ago, was standing over his grave calling me a fraud. Vivian held up a folder, edges damp with drizzle. "Sterling's blood type was O negative," she announced. "Brooks is AB positive, genetically impossible." She paused, letting the words settle like poison. "I have the medical records right here." She tapped the folder for emphasis. "Sterling may have loved her, but love doesn't change biology." I felt the air squeeze out of my lungs. My stepbrother Dexter, tall and polished in his expensive black suit, stepped beside her with a smirk that made my stomach twist. "Sorry, sis," he said, dragging out the word with deliberate cruelty. "Guess you're not really family after all. Mom's already talked to lawyers about the will." His words hit harder than the cold. The will. Of course. This wasn't grief, it was greed dressed up in mourning clothes. They were already circling, waiting for the body to be buried before tearing apart what was left of his legacy. Aunt Greta stepped forward, trembling with rage. "You heartless woman," she hissed. "You couldn't wait a single day." Vivian's face softened into false pity. "I'm sorry, Greta, but people deserve to know the truth. It's better to face facts now than fight later." Her voice was syrupy sweet rehearsed, the kind of tone you use when you think you've already won. I tried to speak, but my voice came out thin, fragile. "You're lying." Vivian turned toward me, her smile widening just slightly. "Am I Sterling's blood type was O negative. It's right here." She waved the papers again. "Yours is AB positive. I even confirmed it from your blood donation record last spring." "It's science, dear." "Not emotion." My aunt tried to grab the folder, but Vivian stepped back, clutching it to her chest. "This isn't about malice," she said. "It's about truth and fairness. Dexter is Sterling's true heir. He carries his blood, his name, his future." The crowd erupted again. Some whispered in disbelief. Others avoided my eyes, unsure what to think. The wind picked up cold and biting. My fingers felt numb. I wanted to scream to defend myself, but all I could do was stare at the polished wood of my father's casket and think he's gone, and she waited until he couldn't defend me. Behind Vivian's shoulder, a movement caught my eye. Mr. Eugene Holbrook, Dad's lawyer, standing silently beneath an oak tree. He'd been there all along, watching his briefcase clutched like something sacred. His eyes met mine steady and calm, and for the first time since Vivian spoke, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It wasn't hope yet, but it was the faintest hum of justice waiting its turn to speak. The world had gone strangely quiet. The voices around me blurred into one long, hollow hum, like I was standing underwater. The October wind whipped through the cemetery, catching the edges of my black dress, but I barely felt it. I was still hearing her words echoing in my head over and over. Not his real daughter. They clung to me like frost. My knees threatened to give way, and if Mallory hadn't grabbed my arm, I might have fallen straight into the mud beside my father's grave. Somewhere behind me, someone murmured a prayer. Someone else whispered, "Poor thing." But all I could see was the polished mahogany casket disappearing inch by inch into the earth. I wanted to scream to tell them all to stop to make her take it back, but my throat locked tight. Vivian's perfume, a cold blend of lilac and money, drifted through the air. She was still talking, still performing like this was her stage. "Sterling was a good man," she said, pressing a tissue to her perfectly dry eyes. "But he was too sentimental. He let his heart blind him." She paused, letting the words hang. "It's time this family faced the truth." I looked at Dexter standing beside her, his arms crossed, chin lifted like a prince inheriting a throne. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. His silence was agreement enough. The humiliation burned deep. I wasn't just losing my father. I was being erased from him, rewritten out of his story, while the ground still held his warmth. My aunt tried to intervene again, her voice breaking. "Vivian, please not here. Let the man rest." Vivian smiled, that soft, poisonous smile. "The truth doesn't care about timing, Greta." Her words landed like stones. The truth, as if she owned it. I could feel every eye on me now, the pitying, the curious, the judgmental. They weren't just watching a funeral anymore, they were watching a scandal unfold. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned slightly away, trying to breathe, but the air felt thin. I thought about my father's hands, rough from years at the hardware store, the way he'd ruffle my hair when I'd visit after work. "You're my girl, Brookie. Always will be." The memory hit me so hard, I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out loud. I wanted him there more than anything wanted him to tell them they were wrong. But the man who had always protected me was lying silent beneath a layer of earth, and the woman he'd trusted most was tearing apart the life he'd built. I felt dizzy, the edges of the world dimming. Somewhere far off, the pastor cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Perhaps we should—" "No," Vivian interrupted. "They deserve to know what Sterling hid." Her tone was sharper now, her control slipping as she realized she had an audience. She wanted spectacle. She wanted witnesses, and she had them. Every whisper, every camera phone discreetly lifted from a pocket was fuel for her performance. The shame was suffocating. For 32 years I had been his daughter, his pride, his shadow at the store, his partner at Sunday dinners. And now I was a fraud in their eyes, a charity case in black. The weight of it crushed the air from my chest. I wanted to run to escape the murmurs, the pity, the humiliation, but my legs wouldn't move. That's when I noticed Mr. Holbrook again, still standing under the oak tree. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, just watched. But there was something in his face, a quiet certainty that cut through the chaos. He met my eyes and gave the slightest nod so small I might have imagined it. The storm inside me stilled for a second. Maybe he knew something I didn't. Maybe my father had known this day would come. The thought steadied me just enough to breathe again. The world around me was still cold and cruel, but somewhere deep down beneath the ache and the anger, a fragile thread of resolve began to form. I wasn't ready to fight yet, but I would be. The sound of Vivian's voice faded as a low baritone cut through the chaos like a blade. Mrs. Caldwell, it said, calm but firm. The entire crowd turned. Mr. Eugene Holbrook, my father's lawyer for more than 20 years, stepped forward from beneath the oak tree. He moved with measured certainty, his polished shoes somehow avoiding the mud that had ruined everyone else's. The drizzle darkened the shoulders of his gray suit, but he didn't seem to notice. His expression was carved from stone, composed, authoritative, the kind of presence that made people lower their voices without realizing why. Vivian blinked, caught off guard by the interruption. "Eugene," she said, trying to sound warm, "this isn't the time or place for legal matters. We're saying goodbye." "Yes," he said quietly to a man who deserves peace. "But you've turned his funeral into a courtroom, Mrs. Caldwell, so let's treat it like one." The air shifted. People who'd been whispering a moment ago went still. "Mr. P?" Holbrook approached the casket, setting his briefcase gently on a nearby folding chair. His movements were deliberate, controlled the way my father used to tighten a bolt, precise, unhurried, certain. He looked at Vivian the way a judge looks at a defendant who has already said too much. "Before you continue this spectacle," he said, "perhaps you should hear what Sterling left in my care." A murmur swept through the mourners. Vivian's eyes flickered, but she straightened her shoulders, forcing a smile. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Sterling's affairs have already been handled. The will was filed last week." "Not this," Holbrook said. "This was separate. Personal." He reached into his briefcase and drew out a large manila envelope sealed with red wax and stamped in my father's handwriting. The sight of his familiar slanted letters, Sterling Caldwell, hit me like a wave. "What is that?" Dexter asked, stepping closer, curiosity fighting his unease. "Something your father asked me to protect?" Holbrook said evenly. "He called it insurance, for this exact moment." Vivian laughed, too high, too brittle. "Insurance? Eugene, really? This is absurd." "Absurd," Holbrook repeated. "You've just accused a dead man's daughter of fraud at his burial. I'd call that absurd." The crowd shifted again, embarrassed coughs, uncomfortable stares. Even the pastor seemed unsure whether to step back or stay. Aunt Greta folded her arms. "I'd like to hear what Sterling had to say," she said loudly. Several others murmured agreement. Holbrook nodded once. "Sterling anticipated this might happen." He said, his voice steady but carrying easily. "6 months ago, he came to my office with very specific instructions. He was concerned about potential complications after his passing." His gaze lingered on Vivian, then Dexter. He handed me a sealed package and said, "If Vivian ever claims Brooke is not my daughter, read this letter in public, immediately." The words hung in the air like thunder. Vivian's smile faltered. "That's ridiculous! You expect us to believe it's in his handwriting," Aunt Greta interrupted. "We all know Sterling's script. You couldn't forge that if you tried." Vivian's face flushed. She turned toward Dexter, but he looked uneasy, now his confidence wavering. The drizzle had turned to light rain, tapping softly against umbrellas and the tops of headstones. Mr. Holbrook waited until the murmurs died down. Sterling wanted clarity. He continued. He understood that grief brings out greed and that love, real love, is often the first casualty of inheritance. He looked straight at Vivian. He told me, and I quote, "If she tries to rewrite my daughter's story, make sure the truth speaks louder than her lies." The crowd gasped. Someone whispered. He knew. Vivian's jaw tightened. "You can't read that here," she said. "This is private family business." It was, Holbrook replied, "until you made it public." His calmness was lethal. Every word landed like a hammer. He looked at me, then his expression softening just enough to register humanity. "Brooke, your father left this for you," he said quietly. "Would you like me to read it now?" My voice shook, but I nodded. Around us, the cemetery had gone utterly still. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the earth itself were waiting. Holbrook broke the wax seal, the faint crack echoing across the rows of graves. He opened the envelope carefully, like it might contain something alive. For the first time since Vivian had spoken, I felt the balance shift just slightly, but enough. The chaos had order again. The truth was waking up. Mr. Holbrook unfolded the first page slowly, the paper trembling just slightly in his hands. The rain had softened to a mist now clinging to his gray hair and darkening the ink at the edges. When he began to read, his voice was steady, deep, carrying through the air like something sacred. "If you are hearing this, it means my fears were not unfounded," he read. "Vivian, I had hoped you would let love outlast resentment, but I suspect greed speaks louder to you than grief ever could. To my daughter Brooke, my real daughter, know that I anticipated this moment, and I made sure the truth would survive me." My breath caught. Around us no one moved, even the pastor stood frozen eyes fixed on the letter. Holbrook continued, "Brooke, you are my child in every way that matters, by love, by devotion, and yes, by blood. When you were 8 years old and needed surgery after that bicycle accident, your doctors ran tests to prepare for transfusion. I learned then what I already knew in my heart: you are mine. The hospital confirmed it through a DNA analysis. I kept that record sealed for your protection, not because I doubted you, but because I feared what envy might do to you when I was gone." I heard the sound of Vivian's breath catch a sharp inhale of disbelief. Dexter turned toward her, brow furrowing, but she kept her gaze fixed on the letter as though she could burn through it with willpower alone. "He's lying," she muttered under her breath. Holbrook's voice rose just slightly, commanding silence. "I wanted Brooke to live her life without ever having to prove her worth," he read. "But if she stands accused, then let these words serve as my testimony. She is my daughter, my pride, my legacy. The stores bear our name not because of inheritance, but because of the values she shares with me: integrity, compassion, work done with clean hands." My eyes blurred, not from the mist, but from the heat behind them. I remembered those Saturday mornings, the smell of sawdust, the weight of the clipboard in my small hands, my father's steady voice saying, "Check twice before you trust a supplier." He'd taught me everything from counting inventory to treating customers like neighbors. And now, even in death, he was still teaching me, showing me that love prepared for war when it had to. Holbrook turned the page. "If anyone questions this letter's validity, Eugene has my permission to present the enclosed medical verification and recording of my own statement made in his office 6 months ago. I did this not out of paranoia, but out of pattern recognition. I know Vivian. I have loved her despite her ambition, but I also know that love will not restrain her if she feels cornered." A ripple moved through the crowd. Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line. Her composure was cracking, the faint tremor at the corner of her mouth betraying her control. "He's manipulating you from the grave," she said louder now, but her voice wavered. "This is all theater." "No," Aunt Greta said softly. "This is Sterling." Holbrook's voice softened as he reached the final paragraph. "Brooke, I wanted to spare you the pain of public defense, but if Vivian forces your hand, stand tall. Truth is like a hammer, it might fall slowly, but it always lands hard. Remember, this blood doesn't make family. Love does. And love made you my daughter long before a hospital test ever did. I have left instructions that will protect what's rightfully yours. Trust Eugene. He will know what to do." When Holbrook lowered the letter, the air seemed to hold its breath. Even the drizzle stopped. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, the kind that feels like reverence. Then someone sniffled. A woman whispered, "He knew this would happen." My heart felt like it was breaking open and mending at the same time. He had known. He had prepared. Even in death, he had built a wall around me made of ink paper and truth. I looked at Vivian then. Her cheeks had lost their color. The perfect control she'd worn like armor was slipping. The folder she'd brandished earlier hung loose in her grip. I thought she might still fight, might claw for another angle. But for the first time, she looked unsure. Holbrook folded the letter neatly and placed it back in its envelope. He met my eyes again, the faintest trace of warmth softening his features. "There's more," he said quietly. "Sterling left a recording as well. His words, his voice. He wanted you to hear them. And in that moment, I realized the truth wasn't done speaking yet." Mr. Holbrook reached into his briefcase again and withdrew a small digital recorder sealed in a clear plastic pouch. He held it up for everyone to see. "This was recorded in my office," he said, 6 months before Mr. Caldwell's passing. "I was present, as was my assistant. The date and timestamp are intact. The quiet in the cemetery turned absolute. You could hear the faint tapping of rain on umbrellas, the shuffle of feet in the mud, the rustle of wet leaves. Holbrook clicked the play button. Static crackled, then came a voice, my father's. Strong, steady, unmistakable. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. The recording began. My knees went weak. Hearing his voice again, it was like the air had been punched from my lungs. I'm not one for dramatics. Dad continued, his tone practical just as I remembered it. But I know my wife. Vivian, you've always been clever. Too clever for your own good. You've been planning this for years, haven't you? To make sure your son inherits everything, even if you have to erase my daughter to do it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vivian's face tightened, the color draining completely. She opened her mouth to interrupt, but the lawyer lifted a hand, silencing her. Don't bother pretending, Dad's voice went on. You left your browser open once. You'd been looking up blood type incompatibilities, inheritance loopholes, even private DNA testing. You thought I didn't notice. I always noticed. I felt my heart twist. The image of him sitting in that office, older, weaker, but still the same deliberate man, played in my mind. I've seen the way you look at Brooke, the recording said, with resentment, like she's a reminder that love existed before you. You've resented that she reminds people of my first wife, kind, steady, unpretentious. You never forgave that I kept her picture on the mantle. So if you're trying to use blood to disown her, let me save you the trouble. I've already had the test done. The results are stored with Eugene. They prove she's mine. There's also something else you should know. Holbrook glanced briefly at me, then back at the crowd, his face unreadable. Dexter, my father's voice said, pausing. You deserve to hear this too. I raised you as my own for 8 years. I paid for your school, your cars, your failed startups. But you are not my biological son. The world stopped. I heard someone gasp, maybe me. Vivian stumbled a step backward. That's a lie, she cried. But the recording kept playing. Vivian, when you told me you were pregnant, I believed you. I wanted to. I married you because I thought we were building a family. But I've known the truth for years. I didn't confront you because I didn't want to destroy what little piece was left. The man who fathered Dexter was your coworker, Tom Hadley. Wasn't he? Gasps turned into low murmurs. Dexter's eyes went wide, his jaw clenching, his face flickering between anger and disbelief. You told me you loved me, Dad's voice said softly, weary now. Maybe you did once, but love doesn't lie, it doesn't steal, and it doesn't wait for a grave to open before it strikes. The sound of his breath filled the recorder, slow, deliberate. The breath of a man saying what he'd carried too long. Brooke, if you're listening, I'm sorry for not saying this while I was alive. I thought silence would protect you. I see now that silence is what monsters depend on. You are my daughter, my everything. And if anyone tries to tell you otherwise, you let my voice remind them who you are. The recording clicked off. For several seconds, no one moved. It was as if the entire cemetery had frozen in time. Then Vivian swayed slightly, her hand clutching Dexter's sleeve. He's manipulating us, she hissed, but the words came out weak, almost trembling. Dexter didn't answer. His face had gone pale, his eyes unfocused. He looked like a man watching the ground vanish beneath him. Holbrook turned off the recorder, placed it back in its pouch, and spoke quietly. Sterling requested this be played publicly if necessary to prevent any dispute. Then louder. The DNA test, notarized and sealed, confirms every word he said. It is filed with the county registrar. Murmurs turned into whispers, then into silence again. Vivian's hand fell to her side. The power she'd wielded so confidently minutes ago was gone, drained from her face, replaced by shock. Around us, people shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided looking at her. Some looked at me with a mix of pity and awe. I stood still, the chill cutting through my coat, but for the first time that day, I felt something warm in my chest. Not victory yet, but the slow return of dignity. My father had spoken, and even from the grave, his truth was louder than her lies. The silence that followed the recording felt almost holy, the kind of quiet that comes when something false finally collapses under the weight of truth. The rain had stopped altogether now, as though the sky itself refused to interfere. Vivian stood perfectly still, her hand trembling against the folded folder she had clutched since the beginning. Her lipstick, flawless an hour ago, was smudged at the corner. She looked less like a widow and more like someone caught mid-performance, the audience suddenly gone cold. Dexter was the first to move. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracked. "Is it true?" Vivian turned to him sharply, but her eyes betrayed panic. "Of course not," she snapped. He was sick. He didn't know what he was saying. The words came out too fast. People exchanged glances. Even Aunt Greta, who had been biting her tongue to stay polite, took a step forward. "He knew exactly what he was saying," she said. "He planned this months ago. You heard him." Vivian's voice rose. "He was dying. Greta?" He was confused, but the more she spoke, the more desperate she sounded. That man lied to protect his ego. He couldn't stand that Dexter was better than his precious Brooke. Enough. Holbrook interrupted, his tone firm. "Every word you say now will only dig the hole deeper. The documents are verifiable. The hospital records, the audio, the notarized affidavit, all of it." Vivian glared at him. "You're enjoying this, aren't you, Eugene? You've always hated me." He didn't flinch. "I don't hate you, Mrs. Caldwell. I just know what Sterling asked me to do, and I intend to honor that." He opened his briefcase again and produced 2 sealed envelopes. "These," he said, "contain copies of the verified DNA reports. One is already filed with the county as your late husband required." He turned toward the pastor. "Sir, please note the witnesses present." The pastor nodded awkwardly, eyes darting between them, clearly wishing he'd chosen a different vocation that day. A few of the guests, friends of my father's former employees from the store, began murmuring. Words like liar and disgrace floated through the damp air. Vivian's mask slipped completely then. Her eyes, once sharp and commanding, turned wild. "You're all fools," she shouted. "That man ruined me. I gave him the best years of my life." "Funny way of showing it," Aunt Greta muttered. Vivian's chest heaved. She turned to Dexter again, her voice breaking. "Say something. You know he's lying." But Dexter just stared at the ground. His hands were shaking. "Mom, is it true?" he asked again, quieter now. "About Tom Hadley?" She didn't answer. The pause was answer enough. Gasps rippled through the mourners again. The truth wasn't just written now, it was alive in the silence between mother and son. Dexter staggered back a step. "You used me," he said almost to himself. "You lied to him, to me." "Stop!" Vivian cried, grabbing his arm, but he pulled away. "You lied about everything." His voice cracked like glass. "You said he didn't care about me, that I deserved what was his. But you were the one stealing from him." The air felt heavy with every word. Vivian's shoulders sagged. Her hand, still gripping the useless folder of proof, began to tremble. "I did it for you," she whispered. "For us." "No," Dexter said, voice shaking with fury. "You did it for yourself." Holbrook waited a respectful beat, then said evenly, "Mr. Caldwell's instructions are clear. As of this moment, his estate transitions fully to Brooke Caldwell as primary heir and executor. Dexter, as per Sterling's handwritten amendment, you will receive a trust fund reserved for education and debt settlement contingent on completion of counseling and a written statement of acknowledgement." The amendment was filed and notarized 3 days before his hospitalization. Vivian's knees buckled. She sank onto the nearest folding chair like someone deflated. Around her, the crowd began to disperse, some quietly, some whispering behind gloved hands. The spectacle she'd created was dissolving into pity. I didn't move. I couldn't. My father's name, the one she'd tried to stain, now echoed in every stunned whisper, but this time it carried honor. I looked at Holbrook, who gave a small, reassuring nod. Justice had been served in its first form, truth made public. Vivian's gaze met mine one last time. There was no venom left, only exhaustion. "You win," she muttered. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said quietly. "Dad did." The rain started again, light, almost cleansing, as the crowd drifted away, leaving the scent of wet earth and the faint, unshakable weight of truth behind. By the time the cemetery emptied, the sky had turned the color of steel. The ground was slick, my shoes soaked through, but I stayed. For a while, it was just me, the casket, and the sound of distant traffic on the county road. I could still hear my father's voice in the air, calm, steady, unshaken, even in death. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. Holbrook approached quietly, carrying his umbrella like a soldier holding a flag after battle. "You don't have to stay," he said softly. "The county clerk will process everything within 48 hours. I'll handle the press inquiries if they come." "The press?" I asked, startled. He sighed. "You can't humiliate a family in public without drawing attention. Someone recorded that funeral, half the town will have seen it by tonight." I nodded, numb. "Let them." He studied me for a moment. "You sound like your father," he said, then added almost as an afterthought. He was proud of that. When he left, I knelt by the grave. The rain had turned to drizzle again, soft and uneven. My fingers brushed against the cold earth. "You knew she'd do this, didn't you?" I whispered. "You saw her coming before I ever did." The wind moved through the trees like a sigh. I closed my eyes. Over the next few days, the story spread exactly as Holbrook predicted. The video made its rounds on local social media, grainy footage of Vivian shouting my father's voice echoing from the recorder. Dexter's disbelief captured in still frames. The comments were merciless. Justice served. She got what she deserved. The truth always comes out. For once, gossip worked in my favor. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt hollow. My father's house stood quiet and cold when I walked through it a week later. His tools still hung neatly in the shed. His coffee mug, Sterling's Hardware. Fix It Right or Don't Fix It at All sat on the counter beside a dried ring of coffee. I sat in his chair, breathing in the smell of cedar and memory, and for the first time I let myself cry. Not for the humiliation, not for the lies, but because I finally understood the cost of his silence. When I opened my eyes, I saw a folded envelope on the mantel tucked behind an old photograph. My name was written across it in his unmistakable hand. Inside was a short note. "Brooke, if you found this, then the storm has passed. Don't let anger make a home in you. I've left you the company because you'll build, not destroy. Let Holbrook guide you, but listen to your own instincts. They've always been your strongest compass. Remember, justice is only half of healing. The other half is forgiveness, even if it takes time." I pressed the letter against my chest. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace. The following week, I met with Holbrook at the hardware office. We sat at my father's desk, the same one I used to dust when I was a kid. "The transition will be smooth," he said. Dexter signed the acknowledgement. He's shaken." "Will he be okay?" I asked quietly. "He's angry," Holbrook said, "but not at you. Give it time. And Vivian, she's contesting the amendment, but without evidence it'll collapse. The court date won't even last a morning." He hesitated. "She's not the woman she was a week ago. Pride burns hot, then leaves only ash." I looked out the window at the parking lot where my father used to greet customers by name. "He warned her," I said softly, "and still she chose greed." Holbrook nodded. "And you chose grace. He'd call that a fair trade." That night, I stood outside the store as the lights clicked off one by one. The glass reflected my face, older, steadier, but still his. I thought about everything that had been taken and everything he'd quietly made sure I'd get back. The truth hadn't just cleared my name. It had rebuilt my foundation, brick by brick. And yet, somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear his laugh. "Check twice before you trust a supplier, Brookie." Even from the grave, he was still teaching me how to build things that last. 2 weeks later, the world around me began to settle. The shock had rippled through every corner of town, through the church congregation, through the store customers, through the relatives who'd whispered behind cupped hands. But as the gossip faded, something steadier took its place. People started showing up at the stores again, not just to shop, but to talk. They wanted to tell me stories about my father, the free tools he'd given to a young mechanic, the extra hours he'd worked to repair a single mother's heater in the dead of winter, the Christmas bonuses he handed out, even when profits were tight. Each story was another brick in the truth of who he really was. I spent those days sorting files in his office, cleaning the shelves, learning the rhythm of his world. Every invoice told a story. Every ledger line carried his handwriting, precise, patient, stubbornly neat. Sometimes I'd find little notes in the margins, "Call Mrs. D about the lawnmower." "Order new gloves for Pete." "Brookie, remember to eat lunch." He'd left breadcrumbs of care in everything he touched. Dexter came by one afternoon. He looked older, like he'd aged 10 years and 10 days. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in his hands. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly, "but I wanted to thank you for not ruining me when you could have." I closed the ledger and looked at him. "You didn't ruin yourself, Dexter. You just believed the wrong person for too long." He swallowed hard. "She's gone. Vivian packed up last night. Nevada, I think. She left a note saying she needed to start over." "Good," I said softly. "Then maybe she can stop trying to destroy what she doesn't understand." He nodded, then looked down. "Can I still work here?" "Not as family. Just as someone trying to make it right." I thought about it for a long moment. My father's voice came back steady as ever. "Love isn't about blood. It's about showing up." "Come in Monday," I said, finally. "You start with inventory, just like I did." He smiled faintly, something between relief and gratitude. He would have liked that, he said before turning to leave. When he was gone, I stood in the quiet office and realized what had just happened. The cycle had shifted. Vivian's poison had broken, and something new, something my father had believed in, was finally taking root. The following month, I met with Holbrook to finalize the estate transfer. "Everything is officially yours now," he said, sliding a pen across the desk. "The stores, the house, the accounts?" Sterling was meticulous. "I know," I said, my voice steady. He always was. Holbrook smiled faintly. He also left one last instruction. He opened a separate folder and handed me a sealed envelope labeled "to be opened 1 year after my passing." My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single letter written in that same careful script. "My dearest Brooke, if you're reading this, it means you've carried the family name through fire and back. I knew you would. You always saw people for who they were, even when it hurt. You inherited that from your mother. The stores are in your hands now, but remember, they were never about profit. They were about trust. That's your real inheritance. Trust, compassion, and the strength to rebuild when others only want to destroy. As for Dexter, give him a chance if he earns it. I believed there was good in him. Maybe that belief will save him the way it once saved me." Love makes family Brookie. It always did. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred the ink. Holbrook waited silently, then said, "He'd be proud." "You handled it with dignity." I nodded, folding the letter carefully. He taught me how. On the anniversary of his death, Dexter and I visited his grave together. The grass had grown back lush and green, the headstone simple and solid. "Sterling Caldwell, beloved father. Love makes family." We stood there a long time. No drama, no anger. Just the quiet kind of peace that comes when truth finally settles. Dexter laid a small wrench beside the flowers, a mechanic's token of respect. "He built something that lasted," he said. "He did," I replied. "And now it's our turn to keep it standing." As the sun broke through the clouds, the hardware stores across town hummed with life, again filled with the scent of sawdust oil and something intangible: hope. My father had fixed more than broken machines. He'd fixed broken people too. And somehow, even in death, he'd fixed us. The months that followed became a slow rebuilding of everything my father had tried to protect. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just steady work. One conversation, one repair, one reconciliation at a time. I kept teaching at Riverside Elementary during the week, but every Saturday morning I still went to the stores, walking through each aisle like he used to. The smell of metal and sawdust had become my compass, familiar, grounding, almost holy. People treated me differently now, not as the woman who'd been humiliated at a funeral, but as the daughter who'd defended her father's name. They came in with small words of kindness. "Your dad helped me when no one else would," or "He'd be proud of how you handled that day." Each story stitched something back together inside me. Dexter became a regular presence again. He started on inventory just like he'd promised, but he worked harder than anyone expected. He stayed late, volunteered for the least glamorous jobs, asked questions instead of making assumptions. The men who'd once rolled their eyes at his arrogance began nodding to him with quiet respect. I watched him grow into someone my father might have recognized, the kind of man who didn't run from responsibility anymore. One afternoon, I found him sitting in the office with a stack of old photo albums spread across the desk. "I didn't know he kept these," he said, flipping through pictures of Dad holding both of us at the company picnic years ago. His voice was soft, almost reverent. "He looks so happy here." "He was," I said, smiling faintly. "He believed he could hold everything together, and for a while he did." Dexter nodded, eyes glistening. "I think I'm finally starting to understand what he meant about love not being about blood." He paused. "I thought I hated him because Mom told me he looked down on me, but he didn't. He just wanted me to be better than what I was becoming." "You still can be," I said quietly. He smiled then, not the smirk I'd seen at the funeral, but something genuine, boyish even. "I'm trying." That evening when I locked up the store, I looked back at the glowing Caldwell and Family Hardware sign and felt something shift. For the first time, the word family didn't sting. It felt earned. A few weeks later, a letter arrived at my house. No return address, just my name in shaky handwriting. Inside was a check and a note. "Brooke, I'm sorry for everything. I lost everything that mattered because I couldn't tell the difference between control and love. Please forgive me, Vivian." I stared at the words for a long time. There was no anger left in me, only a dull, distant pity. I tore the check in half, but kept the note. Maybe not for her, but for me. Proof that closure sometimes comes quietly without applause. That summer, the town held its annual Founders Parade. The committee asked me to ride on the float, honoring local businesses. I almost said no, but Dexter insisted. "He'd have wanted you there," he said. So I went. As the float rolled down Main Street, the crowd clapped, waving, some calling out, "We miss Sterling Caldwell strong." I smiled not for the spectacle, but for the quiet pride of knowing the legacy was intact. Dexter stood beside me, handing out small wooden keychains engraved with "Love Makes Family." He'd made them himself in the workshop. After the parade, we went back to the original store, the one Grandpa Caldwell had built by hand. Inside, we hung a new photograph behind the counter, my father holding both of us as kids, grinning like he'd built the whole world. Underneath, I added a small brass plate Sterling Caldwell builder father-teacher. His tools fixed more than machines. When we stepped back, Dexter said quietly, "Do you think he'd forgive her?" I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "He already did," I said. That's why we're still standing. Outside, the late afternoon sun caught the gold lettering on the sign. It shimmered like something alive, something earned, and for the first time since the funeral, I finally breathed without feeling the weight of the past pressing on my chest. The truth hadn't just freed me, it had set everything right. It was almost 1 year to the day when Mr. Holbrook called. His tone was as measured as always, but there was something softer in it this time. "Brooke, there's one final envelope your father left in my care. He asked that I deliver it to you exactly 1 year after his passing. Would you like to come by, or shall I bring it to you?" My heart stilled. A year. Somehow it felt like yesterday and a lifetime ago. "I'll come by," I said. The drive to his office followed the same route Dad used to take every Saturday past the old lumber yard across Maple Bridge down the hill to where the courthouse spire touched the sky. The streets looked the same, but I didn't. I wasn't the girl who'd been accused in front of her family. I wasn't the teacher trying to keep her voice steady while a storm raged around her. I was Sterling Caldwell's daughter by choice, by love, and now by legacy. Holbrook greeted me with a small smile. He planned for every outcome he said, handing me a thick, sealed envelope. Said this one wasn't about protection, it was about peace. I opened it slowly. Inside were 3 items, a handwritten letter, a photograph, and a small brass key. The photograph stopped me first. It was of Dad standing in front of the first hardware store, one hand on my shoulder, the other holding a sign that read "Grand Opening 1997. His grin looked younger, freer. The key puzzled me until I read the letter. "My dearest Brooke, if you're reading this, it means you made it through the storm without losing yourself. I'm proud of you, not just for surviving, but for choosing kindness when cruelty would have been easier. There's a locker at the main branch of Sterling Savings Bank number 418. The key you hold opens it. Inside, you'll find something that belongs to both you and Dexter. I know you're wondering why. It's because I want you to build together. Not as half-siblings or step anything, but as partners. You are both my children, and I refuse to let my story end with division. The contents of that box won't make you rich, but they'll remind you what this family was built on: work, trust, and heart. Love, always, Dad." I traced his handwriting with my thumb, feeling the familiar indentation of his pen strokes. He's still teaching, I murmured. That afternoon, Dexter met me at the bank. He'd just come from the store, sleeves rolled, face still smudged with sawdust. When I told him about the letter, he looked surprised, then oddly calm. He never stopped believing in both of us, he said. The bank clerk escorted us to a private room and set the small metal box on the table. My hands shook as I slid the key into the lock. Inside were two things, a thick stack of old papers tied with twine and a smaller envelope marked blueprints. The papers turned out to be deeds transfer documents for a vacant lot just outside town, and the blueprints, a new building layout titled Caldwell Community Workshop. In Dad's neat block letters beneath the title, it read, "To be built and managed by Brooke and Dexter Caldwell for teaching trade skills to anyone who needs a fresh start." Dexter stared at it in silence, then said quietly, "He wanted us to keep building even after him." I nodded, my throat tight. "Not just buildings," I whispered. "People." We left the bank in silence, but it was a peaceful one. Outside, the light caught the edges of the blueprints, making the ink shimmer. For the first time, I could picture the next chapter not just surviving his loss, but continuing his work. That evening, I drove past the old store and stopped in front of the lot listed in the deed. It was empty, covered in tall grass and wild daisies. I stepped out of the car, the wind lifting the edge of the blueprint in my hand. In that moment, it didn't feel like an ending at all. It felt like the beginning of something my father had seen long before any of us did. He'd left me truth, justice, forgiveness, and now purpose. The kind that doesn't fade when the cameras stop recording or the gossip dies down. The kind that keeps you building even through grief. 6 months after finding the blueprints, the construction began. The Caldwell Community Workshop started as nothing but a patch of uneven ground behind the third hardware store, the one closest to the old train tracks. Every day after teaching, I'd drive there, change out of my blouse and heels, and trade them for work gloves and boots. The ground was rough, but each hammer strike felt like healing. Dexter handled the logistics, permit supplies, volunteer recruitment. I managed the outreach. We posted flyers at schools, shelters, and churches, free trade classes for anyone willing to learn. Within weeks, the calls started. Single mothers, veterans, teenagers who'd dropped out but wanted to build something. My father would have loved them all. The first day the foundation was poured, I stood beside Dexter and felt the vibration of the cement truck through the soles of my boots. "He would have stood right here," Dexter said, voice low, hands in pockets pretending not to cry. "Pretending badly," I said with a small laugh. He was never good at hiding pride. By winter, the frame stood tall against the gray sky. The community donated time, money, and labor. People who'd once been customers now arrived with tool belts and coffee thermoses. The mayor even stopped by one Saturday. "Your father's dream lives on," he said, shaking my hand. "You've both done something this town will remember." I smiled, but inside I whispered, "We just followed his map." When spring came, the building opened its doors. The scent of fresh wood and oil filled the air as sunlight streamed through the high windows. A hand-painted sign hung above the entrance, crafted by one of the students' Love Makes Family, a Caldwell Foundation project. We invited the entire town to the ribbon cutting. Holbrook came standing in the back with his usual composed dignity. As I gave my short speech, I caught his eye and saw him smile for the first time without restraint. "I used to think legacy was about inheritance," I told the crowd. "Land, money, ownership. But my father taught me that legacy is what you leave in people, not to them. This place isn't about hardware. It's about hard work and the belief that anyone can rebuild their life if someone just hands them the right tool." Dexter cut the ribbon beside me. The applause rolled like thunder. Somewhere in that noise, I swear I heard Dad's laugh again, the full chest-deep one that always made people join in even when they didn't know why. After the crowd thinned, I walked inside alone. The walls were lined with pegboards, shelves stacked neatly with donated tools, every label in my father's handwriting style, simple, legible, deliberate. His old workbench sat near the back, restored from the original store. On top of it lay his coffee mug sealed in resin, forever unwashed, forever home. Dexter joined me quietly. "I still dream about that day sometimes," he admitted. "The funeral, Mom shouting, your face when you realized what she'd done. I wake up and feel sick." "I do too," I said, "but I've learned something since then." "What's that?" "That forgiveness isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's about deciding it can't control you anymore." He nodded slowly. Maybe that's what he meant by build together. We stood there side by side in the place we'd built out of ashes. The air smelled like hope and machine oil. For the first time, there was no weight between us, no step, no half, no shame, just family. Before leaving, I took out the final letter my father had written, the one I'd found tucked in the jewelry box a year earlier. I read it again under the hum of the new workshop lights. Family isn't about who carries your blood. It's about who carries your memory forward. If you can teach others to build what I built, then you've already honored me. As I folded the letter, I realized that he hadn't left me a business. He'd left me blueprints for the rest of my life. Outside, the sign swayed gently in the evening breeze. Love makes family. It wasn't just a motto anymore. It was truth written in steel wood and forgiveness strong enough to hold an entire town upright. The second anniversary of Dad's passing arrived quietly. No ceremony this time, no crowd, no cameras. Just the way he would have wanted it. The workshop had been running for nearly a year, 3 graduating classes, 27 people, certified 5 already hired by local businesses. Every nail driven, every skill learned felt like another verse of his legacy being sung aloud. That morning, I picked up 2 cups of coffee from the diner he used to frequent and drove to the cemetery. The air was cool, threaded with the scent of rain and cut grass. Dexter was already there, kneeling by the headstone, polishing the bronze letters the way Dad had always cleaned his tools carefully, purposefully. "Still teaching me how to do things right," he said, smiling faintly as I handed him the second cup. We sat in silence for a while. The inscription on the stone caught the light, Sterling Caldwell, beloved father. Love makes family. The same words hung above the workshop entrance, carved into wood instead of stone, one to remember him by, one to carry him forward. Dexter broke the silence first. "You know, I used to think forgiveness was weakness, that if I forgave Mom, it meant she won, but now I think maybe it just means she can't win anymore." I nodded. She wrote again last month. Another letter. No money this time, just words. She's in Nevada working at a florist shop, said she thinks about Dad every day. Do you believe her? I think I don't have to. Some lessons she'll have to learn without us. He looked at me, then really looked. You turned everything she destroyed into something good. He'd be proud. So would he of you, I said. He always believed you'd find your way back. Dexter exhaled, setting his coffee down beside the flowers. He never gave up on either of us. That's what I'll never forget. I placed my hand on the cool marble and whispered, "We built it, Dad. The workshop. Your blueprint worked." A soft wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of sawdust from somewhere down the hill where the hardware trucks still passed. It felt like an answer. Later that evening, I walked through the workshop one last time before locking up. The lights hummed overhead. The air was warm and full of the quiet sounds of creation tools, clicking laughter from the back room, the scrape of wood against metal. On the far wall, our students had hung photographs of their first projects, a repaired chair, a new birdhouse, a handmade bookshelf. Under each photo was a small brass tag engraved with the student's name and the word builder. I paused beside one photo, a man in his 50s named Javier, who'd once been homeless but now ran his own repair service. He'd told me that this place gave him his second life. I smiled, touching the edge of the frame. That was Dad's real inheritance, not the stores, not the property, but the ripple effect of one man's steady kindness. Dexter stepped out from the office carrying a box of supplies. "You ready?" he asked. "Almost," I said. "Just saying goodnight." We turned off the lights together. The last thing to go dark was the sign by the door glowing faintly in the twilight. Love makes family. As I locked the door, I realized that for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing in the shadow of his memory. I was standing inside it, illuminated, protected, alive. Driving home, I passed the 3 hardware stores glowing under the streetlights the same way they had when I was a little girl riding shotgun in Dad's old truck. But this time, I didn't cry. I just whispered, "We did it," into the quiet. At home, I placed his final letter, creased and faded now, on the mantel, beside a small framed photo of him smiling with sawdust in his hair. I lit a candle the way Mom used to and sat in the flickering light. Outside, the town settled into night, and somewhere far beyond the reach of light or sound, I hoped he could see it all: the stores, the workshop, the healed family he'd built even after he was gone. Love had made family, and that I knew was forever.